Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Scott Glassman. I'm the director of the Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at PCOM. And it's a pleasure to be talking with you today about something that I've spent a lot of time in my career as a psychologist thinking about, and that's good communication. What are the ingredients of good communication? Apologize for not having video on. We're just trying to solve one of those little technical glitches that sometimes Zoom throws in our path. But if we do solve that, then you will be able to see me. Otherwise, you will have my voice as a guide to that. So, like I said, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we can. I'm getting an invitation to start my video. There I am. Okay,
Welcome, Dr. Glassman.
thank you so much. I spent a lot of time thinking about how we can be better communicators. How can we create more empathy and closer relationships through the way in which we have conversations? And there's a specialized approach in psychology called motivational interviewing. If you haven't heard of motivational interviewing, it really is a way of having a conversation that encourages the best in people to come forward. And I'm going to use that way of having a conversation and all the evidence that points toward the fact that when we have those conversations, it improves our well-being, the quality of our relationships, our motivation to make healthy changes and to persist in those changes in our lives. So that's going to be the framework for today. And the goal is to come out of this with a few nuggets, a few tips for how you can bring good listening into your relationships, your family relationships, your work relationships, and any relationships, even if it's a short conversation with somebody that you're just meeting for the first time, an acquaintance or a stranger. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of these tools as well and increase how much empathy you're able to provide and build those levels of trust and build those levels of connection that we know contribute to overall well-being. So let me just start out by talking a little bit about what gets in the way of good communication. And some of these that you see here on this slide may already be very familiar to you as things that interfere with a good listening. What is good listening? Well, what isn't good listening may be a good place to start. And the first is when you are ordering, warning, or moralizing. The first three. So any times that you're doing that, you're usually kind of being forceful and setting up a kind of a hierarchical, pressuring type of relationship. Whenever you're pushing somebody to do something, or you're trying to pressure them into a change or into a course of action, that usually shuts down a sense of connection. That's usually the antithesis to understanding. It's really about control and authority. And the same too with advising and using logic and criticizing. You may have some really good advice from your lived experience, from your role as a healthcare provider, or whatever role that you might have in your work, in your personal life. And you may have this incredible positive desire to help others with your knowledge base. But what we know happens is that that can be an interfering factor when it comes to helping somebody feel heard. It's not about you inputting expertise or information or logic or passing judgment in any kind of way. And that can be both critical and it can also be in the form of praise. We don't consider praising somebody to be a good listening strategy, right? I mean, it can feel good, but it doesn't necessarily promote somebody to help them tell you more about what's happening with them and more about their thoughts, their attitudes, their beliefs, their values. And of course, labeling someone really shuts down a conversation and shuts down the listening channels. Nobody likes to be labeled. I can't think of a single instance when a label, this single dimensional idea that somebody imposes on another, can have a humanizing effect. We want to treat others in the course of a conversation as whole human beings and really respect their autonomy and the totality of their humanity. And when we label, we narrow that, we shut that down. Analyzing is also counterproductive to the listening process. Whenever we try to pick something apart that somebody has said and try to infer what that might mean about their personality, um, then we are getting in the way of understanding that person at a deeper level from their perspective. Reassuring. So I don't know if you can think of a time when you reassured somebody, oh, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Usually that comes out of a really good place, right? We want to help ease somebody's anxiety or make them feel better in some way, shape, or form. But what happens when you reassure somebody, it shuts down communication because it can have the effect of minimizing what their experience is or what their struggle is. Telling somebody, oh, it's just going to be okay if they've had a major loss feels too like you can feel the incongruence of that, right? You can feel how that is a little bit kind of a trite, almost condescending way of meeting them. You're not meeting them where they're at, certainly. So reassurance says more about you and your needs as a speaker than it does about the relationship and about the other person. Questioning. So that's an interesting one, right? So sometimes you may think of, well, I'm a good communicator if I can ask good questions. And to a certain extent, that's true. When we ask good questions, that promotes curiosity and understanding. And there's lots of good questions that we can ask about others that are curious. What happens when questioning takes over, though, is that it can feel a little bit like an interrogation. So if you think back to a time when you've been asked a lot of questions in a row, did you feel like you were being understood, or did you feel like maybe somebody was probing, trying to figure out something or treat you like a diagnostic problem? That's the effect that many, many questions in a row can have in the relationship that the communication is taking place, the context within that relationship. So questioning can interfere with good communication. And then lastly, the 12th roadblock, these all come from Thomas Gordon, who's done a lot of work in this area of communication and is an inspiration to the motivational interviewing folks, is avoiding. So we can kind of turn away from having a dialogue or not really listen. How many of us have been on our phones, like surfing or doing something else while somebody's talking to us? And yet we're still having the conversation, we're still having the dialogue, but it's at such a surface level that we're not really processing what they're saying at a deep level, and we're likely not remembering what they're saying to us. And this can be somewhat embarrassing if you've been distracted or you're trying to multitask while you're having a conversation. And the person asks you, oh, so what did I just say? I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you get tested by, it could be by a spouse or significant other, a partner, a family member. They test to see whether you were listening. And if your attention was divided, it becomes very, very hard to really give an answer that shows that you were listening, and that can be a problem, obviously. You can try to make something up or you can try to hedge, but then you're being dishonest about how the fact that you were disconnected in that moment. I think a good strategy there is to acknowledge that you know what, I was distracted in this past few minutes, and I really do want to listen to you now. So let me put my phone down. Let me turn the TV off. Let me stop thinking about the 5, 10 emails that I need to return. And that can create a really respectful space to have a better conversation where deep listening can thrive. So what I would encourage you to do, and each of these points, each of these slides today has a little bit of an activity that can help you be a better communicator, a better listener. And this would be just notice when you're in a place where you want to give advice, where you want to moralize or warn, where you might want to praise someone or maybe reassure them. Just becoming, in a mindful way, more aware of these tendencies can help you change that response style. And that's what we're looking to do when I train folks and groups in good communication. It's helping them reshape their habits of communication. We all develop kinds of habits of listening, the way we listen. And some of us, quite honestly, are better listeners based on our practice than others. And we can acknowledge that we all have room to grow. Even though I've been practicing motivational interviewing and good communication techniques for the past, wow, going on 16 years, I'm still always improving. And, if I stop my deep listening practice and stop using the strategies I'm going to share with you, I get rusty, just like anyone else. And I lapse. My wife will tell you there are times when I'm not a good listener for her, and she's a therapist too. So we have an LCSW and a psychologist living in the same house. My 15-year-old son is so happy about that, by the way. He probably just loves to have all of those conversations about feelings. But we hope that's going to be great for him as he gets older. But she will tell you, that she listens deeply to her clients all day. And sometimes when she comes home, and you may have this experience, if you're in the helping field, that you just want to be listened to in great depth, without advice, without warning, moralization, criticism, labeling, analyzing, any of these roadblocks. So, and I strive to do that, but sometimes we need reminders. What this sometimes indicates, what's an underlying theme for all of these roadblocks? Well, it's the desire for control, usually power, authority, or being right. I think many of us love to be right. There's something so satisfying at times about being like seeing the world in an accurate way or a very helpful way for others. But good communication, good listening is not about being right, about an objective truth. It's usually about being right about what that other person's experience is. And I'll get into more of that. Here's what we need to be aware of too. If you're going to be a deep listener, try to be aware of when what we call, I say we, people in the motivational interviewing field, like Steve Rolnick and Bill Miller, what your fixing reflex wants you to do. And this is the reflex that says, I have all the answers that you need, and I just can't wait to tell you them. Or my ideas are great and they're going to solve your problem. Let me solve your problem. Let me give you this information. Or your fixing reflex could be telling you, I have what you need in order to feel persuaded to make a certain choice in your life, whether that's, maybe eating differently or exercising more or whatever it is. Here's the problem though. If you're having a conversation with somebody who's uncertain, who's ambivalent about maybe making a healthy change, like exercising more or, stopping their procrastination or whatever their change they're thinking about, but they're on the fence. Perfectly normal, right? To be on the fence about making a healthy change. When that fixing reflex clashes with uncertainty and ambivalence, you get a phenomenon that we call in psychology psychological reactance. And psychological reactance is this idea that we tend to disengage from the conversation. Yeah, here's somebody, they're trying to fix me, they're trying to pressure me, and I want to make my own choices. That can be the inner feeling. And then somebody could end up arguing with you if you're trying to fix them. They might be angry, they might get frustrated, they might distance themselves, cut off the conversation. Or this is very common. You might be hearing, yeah, sure, uh-huh, uh-huh. They'll uh-huh you, but they're not really connected, right? So they're giving you what we call yay saying and just trying to kind of get to the next moment or get to the next conversation. So what does this tell us that we need to do to avoid psychological reactance in our conversations? Well, we need to hold back on the fixing reflex. Number one is noticing when it is in full full display, right? We notice the instinct to want to change someone. or fix them or give advice, and then holding back on that. So I want to propose also, so before I go into what some of the solutions are for the fixing reflex, psychological reactance, and avoiding some of these barriers, some of these roadblocks that I've talked about, there's another problem which gets in the way, and this is not a kind of personal problem. This is just in the dynamics of what it is to communicate as a human being, and there are gaps, normal gaps in communication. So right now, I am conveying ideas to you about communication and listening. I have certain meaning that I'm trying to articulate. I have certain thoughts and beliefs and ideas that I'm trying to put into words and then offer to you. But there is a gap between the meaning and what I say. Hopefully, it's not too big of a gap. The meaning and what I want to convey, and then what I actually say. So sometimes, and you may acknowledge this, that our words don't always quite capture our meaning accurately. There's a little bit of a gap, right? There's a little bit of fuzziness, a little bit of blurriness in that. So there can be some sort of meaning loss in me converting what I feel, believe, my attitudes and knowledge, and then what I say, just based on my word choice, just based on maybe how I'm attending to my internal state. So then that's gap number one. So then gap number two is then between the speaker and the listener being you on this webinar or this recording. What you're hearing may not be quite what I'm saying. So that may get, it's sort of like the game of telephone, right? So as in the game of telephone, you're whispering in one person's ear something and they whisper what you said to the next person. And there's sometimes it gets all messed up or it's different. So between what is said and what is heard, there can be information loss. And then the listener, they hear what I said. My original meaning now has had two gaps in what I've said, and then from what I've said to what they've heard. So that meaning now is even fuzzier, potentially. Or it could be, you may have heard very accurately. But then here's what has to happen for you as the listener. What you've heard, you now need to interpret the meaning of what I've said from what you've heard, even though that there's these two gaps. So as you interpret that meaning, there may be some distortion, there may be some dropout, some loss. You may not be quite sure like what really I meant. But then you offer it back to me. You offer it back to me by conveying that interpreted meaning in your words, and there may be additional loss there. So do you see within all of these gaps, sometimes we miss the target. We miss accurately conveying what somebody is feeling, what we call reflecting back. And that's why between these gaps and between the roadblocks of communication, we need to have an attitudinal shift. So we need to move first from a desire for control, power, authority over someone in fixing or being right to a desire to understand them, care for them, maintain respect for their autonomy. So it's this attitudinal shift is important. It will allow you to fill in those gaps more effectively. You won't be so gap vulnerable in your communication and in your listening. And then the other piece of this is you won't have as much of a likelihood of trying to fix somebody, trying to interject or judge, and that leading to reactance and disconnection. So let's try to shift this any recognition of desire for control, power, or authority and fixing into a desire to understand or care for the other person. So how do we do that? So I want to give you the 4 agreements. Now, it's not the famous book, The 4 Agreements, and I don't want to be accused of plagiarizing here. I just love that title, and they happen to be 4 of them. So I call them the 4 agreements. So these are internal statements that you can make to yourself which allow you to get into the heart set of good listening. And the first is, I'm going to work to listen not only to your words, but to your meanings and feelings underlying those words. And I'm going to convey respect and understanding to the best of my ability. The second agreement is, I will strive to see your best intentions and strengths, even when we disagree. And that's the hard part, right? Even when we disagree, can you still work to see those intentions and strengths? I will strive to do that. And these are things that you would say to yourself to prepare you for deeper listening. I will see this conversation as an effort to connect, work better together with you, and become stronger allies. Um, when we communicate, the underlying desire is to connect, is to find common ground and to find understanding and a shared experience in some way. The fourth agreement is, and I love this one. I like them all, but this one especially. I recognize that relationships in the human experience are not easy and that I am imperfect and I'm prone to mistakes. And I'm going to add a little to this. I may misunderstand what you're saying, but I will strive to understand even more if I miss. So these are the four agreements. It sets the right heart stage for us to listen deeply. So what are the four? I promised four specific tools that you can use to listen in a deeper fashion. The first tool is open-ended questions. So when you have open-ended questions, more open-ended questions than we call closed-ended questions, it's like you're opening the door to your listener to really tell you about their lives, right? So that you ask them to become the speaker and then you become the listener. So it's a kind of a cue. So tell me how you're thinking about what happened this morning with your son. Maybe that's an example. What led you to feel that way? And after this open-ended question, you're going to get a lot of information. Somebody is usually going to disclose a lot more versus if you ask a closed-ended question, did you feel sad? Did you feel upset with your son this morning? Do you see how that leads to a single word of an answer? No, I didn't feel sad. Or yes, I did feel sad. Versus, tell me how you were feeling about that conversation with your son this morning. Oh, it was really difficult. We were arguing and he felt like I wasn't understanding him. And right, you're learning a lot more from their open-ended questions. We want to ask more open-ended than closed-ended questions when we go to start our deep listening. Affirmations are very conducive to somebody telling you more about their lives. So an affirmation is a recognition of somebody's strength, their strength. Like a strength for all of you, you're devoting part of your very, very valuable time at the end of a week to learning something new and being open to something new. And I'm so appreciative of how open you are to this information and to these ideas. So that was an affirmation. And anytime you affirm a strength within a communication style, within your communication stream, then you are going to promote somebody telling you more. Now, reflections. Let's go to the next one. Reflective listening is the cornerstone for empathy. And we want to reflect back. It's almost like imagine holding up a mirror to the person and what they just said, but it's a magic mirror. And when I say magic mirror, it's capturing some of the unspoken meanings and feelings behind what they are saying. So this example here on the slide is it seems like you're feeling frustrated by the conversation that you had with your son, and you really want that situation to be different. So maybe that's not probably what the speaker had told me, but I'm inferring that they're experiencing frustration and that they want a better relationship with their son. And when I reflect that back, here's how you know you've been a good listener. Your partner in the conversation will say, exactly, that's exactly how I'm feeling. You got it. You hit the nail on the head with that. Great. That's your indication that you are on track, that you are really listening well. And then your last tool, oh, by the way, you want more reflections than questions in your conversation. Um, oh, yeah, I will. Alice, thank you so much. Can I elaborate on how an affirmation is different from praise? Yeah, so when you praise somebody, and we praise people all the time. I praise my son probably so much over the years, and we all do that in different respects. When you praise somebody, you're saying, "Great job, fantastic! You did terrific. You're a great fill in the blank. When you praise someone, there's a kind of approval versus a recognition of a quality that they possess. So it's like it's a little bit more shallow when you think about praise. When you affirm, you're recognizing a trait, an aspect, a characteristic of their personality. So instead of telling my son, you did a great job today on the baseball field, I would affirm him and say, you really showed a lot of determination when you struck out those first two times to get back up to the plate and to hang in there, and you eventually got a hit. And that's because you've been determined at this sport and you weren't going to give up. Versus, you did a great job today on the field. That's the difference. One doesn't like go very deep, and the other one really captures something about who somebody is at a very sustained in a sustained way at a deep level. That's a great, Alice, great question. I thank you so much for asking that. And if anybody else has questions, so feel free to pop them into the chat as we go along. I just have a few more minutes, and we're gonna open it up to questions. But summaries. Let's talk a little bit about summaries. I love summaries. Summaries are great because when we have conversations, let's face it, that our who we're listening to will probably be talking for a while if we're just deeply listening to them, right? And there's a lot of content. There's a lot of content in what people say to us. Sometimes I can get a little bit like, whoa, where are we in the landscape? So summaries can help you clarify and bring together the important pieces in what there's. You don't have to summarize everything that somebody just said, but I would recommend to pick out what the most positive, seemingly important components of what they just told you. Maybe four to five aspects of what they said, wrap it up into a summary and offer it back. And I usually preface my summaries by saying, let me see if I can gather where you are with this. You've just been telling me about the argument that you had with your son this morning, how it made you feel frustrated. You wish you could have a better relationship with him, but it always comes into an argument. It really leans into an argument when you're criticizing him, and he doesn't like to be criticized. And you really want that relationship to be different. You've had a couple of ideas there, and the ideas that you've shared they sound very creative. And the first is to basically have a cooling off period at times, and then coming back when you're both calmer and then listening to each other. Is that where you're at with this? How well have I got that? We want to check in after our summaries. So it's really a combination and art of deep listening because you're mixing in all of these different elements, all of these different ors, open-ended questions, asking a couple open-ended questions, affirming strengths, reflecting back more than you ask at a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 reflections for every question is what I'd recommend if you're going to get into that deep listening zone. And then periodic summaries that can be transition points on to where would you like to go from here? I'm not here to tell you what to do, supporting autonomy. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but in having kind of heard what I heard and what I understood, what are the next steps with your son, do you think? What would you like to try with him? All right, so here's where we get to some exercises that you can take away to practice on your own. You can have a conversation with someone where you agree that each of you is going to take 5 minutes to only listen reflectively and ask open-ended questions, but reflect more than you ask. And you might even, this may feel a little artificial at first, but you may even set like a little timer, and so, okay, for these 5 minutes, I'm going to be your listener. I'm not going to give you any advice. I'm not going to be argumentative. I'm not going to provide an opinion. I'm just going to listen to understand versus listening to speak. And there's a difference, right? So, and then you switch roles. So then they listen to you for 5 minutes in the same way. I wonder how that would work for you. Like, go ahead and try that out. I'll have my contact information up soon so you can let me know how that went. But that's a wonderful exercise to really, it's like a muscle. Deep listening is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets and the more automatic it gets. So try it out, see what you think. And then the next idea is notice when you start with a statement, I think that. I've been guilty of that. I think during this webinar, I've used a lot of I think statements. But when you recognize that you're saying, well, I think that you're feeling this way, who's the center of attention when you say I think? It's usually you versus the other person. And when we deeply listen to somebody, we want the spotlight of attention to fall directly and in a sustained way on them. We want them to feel like they're at center stage. And every time you say, I think, it prompts you to give advice or give an opinion and make you the center of attention, you the center of judgment and the arbiter of what's good or what's not good. Okay, so third strategy, see if you can point, this is about getting into the heart set of being a deep listener. See if you can point out three strengths to three different people over the course of the week, the next week, but from Thursday or whenever you're hearing this webinar to the 7 days later. Notice how they respond when you point out a strength. How does that enrich your conversation? How does that lead you to a place of even deeper connection? And that's a very human thing, is really to be strengths based in a divisive culture, when especially where we're approaching an election where there's lots of division and lots of tension and high emotionality. If we can be more strengths focused versus perceived weakness focused or perceived flaw focused, when we are in great stead to build bridges versus continuing the division. And lastly, practice positive mental summaries. Mental summaries. So as someone is speaking, see if you can make a few mental notes of the good things in what they're saying versus the negative things. We all get consumed, I think, with venting and, oh, did you hear what so and so did or happened to so and so, and isn't that terrible, and I can't believe they did that, right? We get locked into the kind of activation, the arousal, the physiological arousal of focusing on the negative. That's in some ways it's fight or flight, activates a lot of our biological and biochemical mechanisms for being vigilant, and that's reinforcing. I recommend seeing if you can step back from that. See if you can positively identify the good in what somebody is saying about who they are and about how they see the world. Identifying I'm going to say that again because it's so important, seeing the good in who they are and the good in how they see the world. Because at the end of the day, what this is all about is you stepping into the shoes of someone else and trying to see the world a little bit through their eyes, and then conveying something of what you think they've experienced back to them. And that is the hallmark of how we're going to come together as communities, as a global society with huge differences. How are we going to bridge those differences? And it begins with some of these behavioral strategies and conversations, it begins with practicing positive mental summaries as well. And that goes back to the 4 agreements, establishing the heart set, the commitments to wanting to connect, understand, listen without judgment, listen without confrontation or advice giving, and having an open heart and feeling fallible. Quite honestly, we're not, any of us, perfect. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to screw up. And if we can have compassion for ourselves, we're much more likely to bring compassion when we screw up to others when they screw up. So thank you so much. And now I'm at 36 minutes, so I think that was the time for the presentation. I do actually, before we get to questions, if I can just present 2 things. If you're interested in anything more about what I've said, learning motivational interviewing, I have a 13-week course that's part of our MS and Applied Positive Psychology program at PCOM, fully virtual program. If you're interested in learning this in a very intensive way and getting great expert feedback, definitely check out our program. We're accepting applications for next September. Also, get in touch with me. There's my email, scottgl@pcom.edu. You can also call me. I'll be happy to talk to you at any time about this. The other thing I wanted to share with you, and we'll put this this link in the chat, is we have Wellness Wednesday groups where we use deep listening as facilitators of those groups to help celebrate who you are and to help you be your best version of yourself. And so those groups meet 12 to 1. They're open to the community. We have many people from PCOM, but we have many people from outside of PCOM as well who join that group. So I invite you, if you want to be in a warm, comforting space where we practice and we abide by these four agreements and these principles of deep listening, I see that as a recipe for personal growth and for flourishing, which what positive psychology is all about, is about human flourishing, and it's reaching our top levels of who we can be, how we can be there for other people. And we talk about everything from stress reduction to what makes us feel happy to gratitude, and a lot about stress reduction. We are a support group in the sense that somebody comes in, they've had a loss, we form a virtual circle around them and really help them. So it's a really wonderful group, and I would invite you to check that out, along with our Master of Applied Positive Psychology program, 1-year program, for a graduate degree in applied positive psychology.